Next, a conversation on the state of technological competition. Please welcome Alex Wang, founder and CEO of Scale AI, and our moderator Morgan Brennan, co-anchor of CNBC's Closing Bell, Overtime.
Well, it's an honor and privilege to be here, and Alex, it's great to be speaking with you today. There's a lot to get to on this big, broad topic of the intersection of AI, national security, and I would say geopolitics writ large. So let's start right there, because you've been framing AI as a war. You call it an AI war. Why?
So first off, I mean, I think it's, if you look globally at this point, geopolitical tensions are clearly very, very high. I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico. My parents were both physicists who worked at the national lab there, and I was a student, therefore, of the Manhattan Project and a student of World War II. And it was always very striking to me. I think something that I've always really believed is the power for disruptive technologies to fundamentally reshape the ways in which the global balance of power. And so you look at the modern day. Clearly, tensions between the U.S. and China are extremely high. This intersects nearly everything that we see and do and we experience. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has had an AI master plan since 2018. They have a clear whole of government approach to become the leader and dominant in AI by 2030. And they've had this very long-range, long-running strategic plan to be able to do so. And it's because they recognize, and I think in America we recognize this as well, artificial intelligence is the technology that has the ability to shape which country will be economically dominant in the future and militarily dominant in the future. And so you think about over the next century, which country will lead, which system of government will lead, which ideology will lead. It all boils down to a few very critical technologies in the moment, and one of them I believe is AI.
It's interesting to hear you reference the fact that you grew up at Los Alamos, because we've talked about nuclear deterrence over the decades and how that has sort of helped to stabilize balance of power in the world. I've spoken to Alex Karp at Palantir, who says, you know what, it's broken. AI is the future of deterrence. Do you see it the same way?
It's complicated. So the beauty of nuclear deterrence is that, or I shouldn't say beauty, but one of the attributes of nuclear deterrence that is very helpful is that everybody can see if you've launched a nuke and if you've detonated a nuke. And so there's this element to which because it's so detectable, there's a huge amount of deterrence against it. AI is a more complicated technology because every country will use huge amounts of AI in their economy over the next few years. It'll just be a part of daily life. And so it'll be hard to actually detect if countries are utilizing AI in a nefarious or in some kind of threatening or damaging way that would require some kind of deterrent action. The other thing that AI really complicates is, one of the things that is maybe most concerning, or we have to be most thoughtful about when it comes to AI, is how it changes nuclear deterrence itself. So right now, nuclear deterrence is built upon this core principle that if if country A launches a nuke into country B, then there's enough time for country B to respond with a second strike. So that is the basis of all of nuclear deterrence. The issue with AI is that it has the ability to potentially remove second strike capability. If you have large-scale AI cyber capabilities that could disable another country's entire military apparatus and capabilities, then you could make it such that there is no second strike, in which case nuclear deterrence could go away as AI progresses.
So we talk about great power competition. It's really great power and technological competition. If we frame it as a competition, how does the U.S. stack up against China right now?
Yeah, so certainly, it's very neck and neck, and I think we've seen that this year with DeepSeek. I mean, DeepSeek, I think, shocked.
Is that a shift? Because I feel like in the past I've heard it wasn't.
Exactly. I think, yeah, if you look at last year, year before, I think most people were like, yeah, China, they're a few years behind us, and I think it was really quite surprising. In retrospect, it was quite surprising how quickly they caught up. In retrospect, it shouldn't be surprising because they have all the ingredients, all the elements. So When I think about AI, it boils down to three pieces: computational power, data, and algorithms. And you can sort of grade the U.S. versus China on each one of these elements. So on computational power, the U.S. is ahead. American chips are the best in the world. On data, China's ahead. China's had large-scale government programs to win on data. China doesn't care about privacy. There are all these ways in which they will naturally be ahead on data, and we need to make sure that we meet and match that. I think that data dominance is a critical US priority. And then if you look on algorithms, historically we've been ahead, but DeepSeek and other algorithms and other models out of China show that they've caught up very quickly. And it's not clear exactly how they've done it. It may be through innovation, it may be through espionage. I think even now it's still not totally clear how they've caught up so much, but that's the scorecard. We're ahead on compute, they're ahead on data, and we're neck and neck on algorithms.
I want to dig deeper into all three of those buckets, but first let's start with data, because you're really on the front lines of data. You cultivate, you fortify the data that gets fed into LLMs, you work with OpenAI, you work with enterprise, you work with government. How do you, make the data process better than in the US?
Yeah, so the benefit...
Or we'll say ex-China.
Yeah. The benefit that we have in the United States is that, if you take military data, for example, we have as a country way more military data than China has, because we're a more experienced military and we've invested into our military over, decades, centuries, frankly, in a way that is impossible for them to match. So from a national security perspective, for example, the US actually should be ahead. We should be winning. But the problem is there's all these legacy reasons why, at the present moment, the data that we have as a country is not aiding our ability to have AI leadership and AI dominance. And so, there's frankly just a bunch of logistical things that as a country we need to solve to achieve data dominance. One of the things that I've advocated for in the past is the United States should establish a national AI data reserve. So just in the same way that we view, we think about other natural resources like our petroleum and oil reserves, or we think about other critical components of our economy and other critical components of our technology stack, data is the oil for AI. Data is the oil of the AI age, and we should build large-scale national reserves to power our dominance in data.
What kind of data would you be putting in the reserve?
I think the first priority would be national security data. There's just so much incredibly useful and valuable data that right now is fragmented and not leveraged for building powerful capabilities.
I want to get to the chips piece of this, the infrastructure piece of this. NVIDIA, for better or worse, and some of the other kind of chip makers that are doing advanced AI, semiconductors, and that type of technology become lightning rods. And you've seen that start to expand out in terms of that intersection of policy, technology, and business, even to some of the software companies with some of the export bans and sales bans that we're seeing put in place, where China specifically is concerned for these American technologies. Is that the best path forward? That disentangling of the global tech supply chain, does that actually help to advantage the US in this dynamic?
So this is a complicated topic, right? Because you sort of have to think about what's the time horizon. In the short term, we have much better chip capabilities than our adversaries, and so in the short term, it's we have this incredible resource. But in the medium to long term, China is a very innovative ecosystem, and for example, catching up on fabs and catching up on chip design are literally national priorities. These are incredibly large-scale national priorities of the Chinese Communist Party. And so, there's this complicated tension between, effectively how much do we weigh the short term and our current advantage in chips, and then how much do we weigh the potential long-term risk that China catches up or even overtakes us in chip capabilities, and how do all the policies today intersect with a lot of this? And I think that's the core tension, really, is like, how do you weigh the short term versus the medium term versus the long term? And I think one of the things that we've seen out of the administration is, we take a view, the administration has taken a view that we need a partner network. That other countries are really critical in enabling the United States innovation ecosystem to continue being a leader and dominant.
You were in the Middle East when President Trump was making his trip a couple of weeks ago. Do you think that provides the template for what we're going to see in terms of this build out with allies around investment in AI?
It was a monumental trip, first of all. I mean, I think it was there's no other way to look at the trip and the incredible amounts of investments that are happening as a result of it. I think that it's a unique scenario because obviously not every country is going to have the sort of capability and capacity to invest at the same degree as some of the countries in the Middle East. But I do think to your point of being a template, like I think to the degree, I think for the United States, one of the things that has been, that caught us flat-footed was the Belt and Road Initiative from China, where all of a sudden we realized that the CCP had built out huge amounts of infrastructure for so many countries around the world, and were very strategically gaining this sort of international influence in a way that I think surprised the United States. I think now what we're seeing is we want to get ahead of it for the AI age, and that I think is the motivating idea and ideology behind what happened in the Middle East, and I think we'll continue doing that more globally.
I want to get to that third bucket that you laid out, compute. Just a basic question, how does the US continue to be dominant in that area, especially as you do see the commoditization of the entire process, if you will? Some have pointed to this DeepSeek moment earlier this year as an example of where that's headed.
I think that the AI space is one of just incredibly fast innovation cycles. I mean, even the technologies, the underlying technologies of like reasoning models or agents or these more complex technologies they're not even the same. It's not even the same conversation as we were having 2 years ago. And so we have to acknowledge that this is just the space is moving incredibly quickly, and to maintain advantage, we need to ensure that like we are racing faster on every front. I think there is no theory of the case for AI where we can just sort of like rest on our laurels in any capacity. And so on every front, on data, we need data dominance. On compute, we need compute dominance. On algorithms, we need algorithmic dominance. Like on every single front of this race, of this competition with China, we need to have a strategy where we get out ahead and stay ahead.
What can policy do to foster this dynamic?
I think there's a few key things. I think first, we're so behind on data that we need data dominance. We need the National AI Data Reserve. We need to make data a clear priority, especially as it pertains to national security mission areas. I think the other things we need to do are we need to build out a lot of the key capabilities. So power is one of the areas that's been very top of mind and a huge topic here in DC as well as nationally, frankly internationally. The amount of power necessary to fuel the large-scale AI data centers that will be built. I mean, it's a transformational journey of power adding power to the electrical grid more at a larger scale than the United States has done for the past few decades. And so that's a clear area where we need to be ahead. And I think broadly speaking, what's really necessary for America is we need to match this like AI master plan coming out of China. So they have a whole of government, large scale master plan. They think about every element and component of this race and think about how do we win on every single axis. And we need to have the same level of a plan where on every dimension we are taking action to win.
So you think the U.S. needs a master plan? Do you think policymakers can come together to craft a master plan? Because historically, it would seem you have new technologies, new innovations, you have these cycles of creation and adoption, and what typically happens is policymakers step back and let it go. They might worry along the way, but they let it go, and then at some point they try and regulate it later.
I mean, I think we're going to see the AI action plan from the new administration, I think in the coming months. And so that'll be, I think, a key component of all of this. I think we're also going to see continued investment from the DoD and the national security community. And frankly, in our conversations that we have with the DoD and folks there, the willingness and excitement to invest big in AI is unbelievable. I mean, it's greater than I've ever seen in the past.
Whether it's on the government side or whether it's on the company side, where would you say we are in terms of innings in this AI adoption cycle?
We're extremely early. I mean, I think where we are now is we're kind of, the technology has moved very, very quickly. And so in terms of technological progress, we're maybe, in the middle innings, it's sort of, we're definitely past the early innings. The investment into these models is astronomical, but adoption is still in the very, very early innings. In whether it's in our economy or in our military or in our government, the adoption of AI is 1% of what it'll be in the future. And so we're at the outset of a large-scale adoption cycle for AI that I think will be incredibly exciting.
How does this affect the jobs market? Anthropic CEO recently made a lot of news basically saying this is going to decimate white-collar workers, particularly entry-level workers. You could see an unemployment rate that spikes into double digits with the broader adoption of AI. Do you see it the same way? Is that a valid concern?
We don't see it the same way. I mean, hey, we definitely believe we are on the cusp of a revolution of our economy. Just in the same way that the Industrial Revolution was this incredible reformatting and expansion and growth of our economy, we're on the cusp of something very similar with artificial intelligence. So it's certainly true there will be a lot of change and a lot of growth within the economy. But our belief is that humans will control the future, and humans do fundamentally control the future. And we sort of see it in this few stages of deployment and a few stages of this life cycle. So I think that the first stage is something similar to where we are now, where humans are getting help from AI systems. We're basically, they are aiding us in accomplishing our day-to-day work, and they're sort of there to ensure that we're able to be successful. At some point in the next few years, we're going to start seeing the second stage of this happen, where it really turns into effectively humans managing AI agents and humans overseeing AI agents. So, instead of us doing all of the day-to-day or the tactical work ourselves, we're going to delegate tasks to AI systems, and we're going to spin up 10 different AI agents that are all going to do various parts of a project, and we're going to sort of like project manage and oversee that entire process. And I think some people think that that's a temporary state, but I frankly think that that's going to be how this works in the future. I think humans are going to continue overseeing and continue effectively managing large scale of AI agents that get deployed throughout the economy. The last thing is, I think it's important to think through, there's a lot of decisions and choices that we have as a society, but fundamentally, we see that AI will be ultimately very good for the American worker. And I think it's important that we develop the technology and we build the technology to be supportive to the American worker. But there's also huge numbers of job opportunities being created in AI itself. So part of our business at scale, and we're just one of many, many companies, but last year, over 100,000 Americans had work opportunities that were created from AI and from improving data sets for AI systems. We believe that grows dramatically by many-fold over the next few years. And so jobs relating to AI and jobs in the AI ecosystem will actually be some of the fastest growing jobs in the world.
What are the skills that are going to be necessary for those jobs?
We were having this conversation backstage a little bit. I think what it really boils down to is a few key things. So one, there will be no replacement for expertise, for specialized and knowledge and expertise that only comes from years of experience in a particular area, where you just for example, journalism better than definitely everybody else, likely everybody else in this room, and that has only come from sort of experience and just being at the top of the game, right? So expertise is very important. The second is vision. You know, we were talking about this backstage, where the ability to, you know, if you know what you want to build, or you know what you want to create, and you have a vision for what that looks like, AIs will help you achieve that. And so I think in some ways, just in the same way that a movie director is not, you know, they don't do any of the acting, they don't do any of the editing, they don't do any of the, usually they don't do the script writing, right? But the director is the one with the vision for what the movie needs to become. And that, I think, is going to be some version of what this will look like for all of us. We will all have a vision for the things we want to create and the things we want to do, and the AIs will help us accomplish that. And then the last piece of this is, frankly, your ability to just drive the execution. Like, you will have, just in the same way that managing humans is really complicated. You know, I think when most people become managers, they think it'll be easy because they don't have to do any of the work anymore. You're just managing all these people, and then you realize managing people is incredibly complicated. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. It's just this incredibly chaotic activity. The same way managing AI agents will be very chaotic.
Managing agents will be chaotic. I want to go back to the data piece of this specifically, because there have been times, and yes, I am a journalist, I have the expertise, but and I see this with some of my colleagues, they'll be like, oh, let me input into one of the systems and see what I should ask this person I'm going to interview. Let me see what questions they suggest back, and interacting in that way. Sometimes you find some, what I will call, sensitive data slippage when you interact with the models, if you prompt them in the right way. How do we secure data? This is a very real issue, I would imagine, from a national security standpoint, but also from an IP standpoint and a corporate standpoint with companies as they begin to implement this more aggressively as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to be actually one of the biggest topics in AI over the next few years, which is, what does your data supply chain look like? And we're early on in the technology. A lot of it has historically been science projects and historically been these large-scale projects. But now that this is going to become the bedrock of our economy, the bedrock of our military, like really the sort of foundation of our modern world, data supply chains are going to become incredibly important. Where is the data coming from, and how do you know that data is secure? How do you know it's correct? How do you ensure that the sources are proper? Like, how do you ensure that you have a proper data supply chain? One of the things that keeps me up at night is the topic of data poisoning, which is, I think,
doesn't sound good.
It's not good. But what's been demonstrated in research experiments is that if you are able to manipulate or poison, so to speak, some small portion of the data used to train AI algorithms, you can change the behavior of these algorithms in really meaningful ways. And so one of the things that an adversary could do, for example, is they could poison the data for one of these algorithms and then build in some kind of switch into the algorithm where if they activated the right phrase or the right prompt, then the model could, for example, leak all of the personal data or leak all the information, classified information that it has access to. So there's very real risks as we think about these models that adversaries will try to poison our data supply chain and poison the data that goes into our models, and we need to have very robust security against that.
I don't even know what to categorize that. Is that like just the next level of cyber threat? Is that the way to think about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think to the next level of, right now, a lot of cyber threat is just, are you in my system? Are you not in my system? And then the next level is like, have you poisoned any of my data that is building my AI systems? Versus, I think countries will do a lot of attacks on each other's AIs that will be initially imperceptible unless you're actively looking out for them.
Okay, I know we're getting to the end here. I'm going to ask a more uplifting question, and that is, some of these emerging applications of AI, whether it's on the industrial side, whether it's robotics, whether I could just go down the list. What are you most excited about, and what perhaps do people not realize could be coming?
I think there's a few. The first one is certainly healthcare. I think that AI will prove to be extremely effective at helping cure diseases and helping drive research and development in healthcare and research and development in biomedical studies. And I think we have the potential to see a revolution in the ability for human, basically the revolution in healthcare and a revolution in drug discovery and related fields. The second is education. Already there are schools that are experimenting with very AI-driven learning workflows, and so far the results are that the students in those schools perform better on standardized tests. So I think the early evidence is really strong that AI will be incredibly beneficial for education. And then the last area, which is I think extremely exciting, is just everything that's happening in the physical domain. So the work in robotics, the work in large-scale industrial manufacturing, the work in applying AI to the physical domain. Right now, it's been a very historically, it's been a very digital field and something that it's mostly we're using on our phones. But I think as it becomes more and more real in the real world, that'll be very exciting.
All right, Alexander Wang of Scale AI, thank you so much for joining me here on stage.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to chat with you again.